Welcome back to Arise Prime Time. I'm Charles Enyekolu, and this wouldn't be prime time without the presence of a commentator to give his personal perspective on the news and issues we discussed here on the program. And today, I'm joined for the rest of the show by the public affairs commentator, Arise News analyst, and head of mass communications at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. First time I'm seeing you this year, so happy New Year.
Compliments.
Simon Kolawole, of course, a legend in his own time, would you say?
Yeah, I think he actually did very well. I always like to describe him as a telling pro stylist, very simple, very circumspectual, and he has a very good understanding of the system, which is why his writings are always evidence-based, always fact-based. You not find him emotional or sensational. And likely, the rise of Simon is somewhat synonymous. The rise of Simon, along with a few others, is somewhat synonymous with the rise of new columning in Nigeria from the 90s upwards. And of course, you credit his genre, his career, with a high level of consistency. Alongside, of course, Segun Adeniyi as well. Waziri came out.
Waziri is also excellent.
Belongs to that category, and in one or two other newspapers as well. These people have distinguished themselves, and you can't undermine the role they play in terms of opinion shaping, in terms of helping readers, audience, the populace to define perspectives in the understanding of the Nigerian process towards appropriate social construction, as the case could be.
But
great efforts they actually are making.
Yes, I would agree with you. But did you find that he was towing very much a middle line?
Yeah, that's his style, really. He's not an extreme. He's always deep, and of course his writings as well, like I said, evidence-based. Always tries to be moderated, and if you like, you could call him a young technocrat, a young statesman, as the case could be. And of course, when you imagine that kind of person, and that person will always like to rise above the fray, always like to be elevated above circumstances, and try to find a balance, a middle ground, a path to progress rather than destruction. It was also very instructive for him to highlight once again the fact that the Nigerian system often romanticizes the past, and of course undermine the present. And doing that simply is probably natural, because people get frustrated with the challenge of coping with the present. And of course, the fact that you are witnessing the present means that you have an opportunity to compare with the past, And oftentimes we find ourselves in a quandary where we sometimes don't know how to make projections into the future. That's what I think is a bit. It's okay to romanticize the past, but the past, like we say in ordinary terms, should only instruct the present, towards the interpretation and proper projection for the future. But if we are too lazy to deal with the present, then of course we'll have difficulty dealing with the future. And the onus is back on us, the ball is back on our table because of the instrumentality of this election, to be introspective once again, to reflect our ability to think into the future by the choice we make at the elections. And the opportunity is there for us as citizens, and we just hope that once again we will not miss it if we have missed it in the past somewhat. But of course, this time around it should be speaker span, and if not, it should be a major improvement on the step we took 7.5 years ago.
You really are a political philosopher, aren't you? Brilliant listening to you talk. But let's turn to Rufus Ayaneba, who is the SDP National Publicity Secretary. A lot of rumors flying around that for the other parties, of which the SDP is one, the 14 others that are not considered front runners, for them to be relevant, they've got to form an alliance with someone else. The newspapers have been talking about the APC and the SDP going into some sort of alliance. He denies it. What do you make of all of that?
I don't think alliance will be visible, just some few weeks to the election, any more than asking their supporters not to vote for their own candidate, but just to vote for the other candidate. It will take a lot away from their reputation.
Yeah, but that's what they did in 2019.
Yeah, but I don't see the category of people we have now in the so-called minority class of politicians or parties doing that, because these are people, some of them are very, very brilliant people. I've said this several times.
Well, to be fair, their presidential candidate is really, he's got his head screwed on right.
Adebayo has a very good understanding of the Nigerian condition in all aspects of it. Showore too, and the YPP man, I think Ado Ibrahim also, many of them like that.
Malik Ado Ibrahim.
Yeah, Malik Ado
That's
Ibrahim.
another brilliant
Many of these fellows are very, very brilliant. It doesn't matter whether they win or not this time, there's still a future for them. And that's why we're saying that whoever wins at the end of the day should also think of a government of national unity, to foster national integration. Look in the direction of these fellows. If you don't want to bring them in to assist you directly, there are ways in which you can harness or harvest their thoughts, which they have been busy rendering during the campaign period. And some of these thoughts are actually genuine, robust ideas, on how to get us out of the woods, Charles. So,
but I mean, sorry, finish what you said.
So it's okay, for instance, if they do not make any mileage. We understand they may be suffering from lack of structures, lack of resources, compared with the behemoths. But in terms of ideation, in terms of penetrating ideas, they have not been found wanting. And on that ground, I think they have some credits that we should reckon with. And I think whoever wins should also reckon with this as well.
Yeah, but how are we going to reckon with those thoughts if they don't form some kind of... I mean, if you look at the UK, for example, the Liberal Democrats had been out of power for so long, they only got into power when they got into bed with the Conservatives. It seemed to make sense that if they've got all these great ideas and these, brilliant presidential candidates that you talked about, who could serve very well this country in appointed positions. I mean, the only way they're ever going to get there is if they form some kind of alliance with the parties that have the best chance of winning.
That's right. I agree with you. But forming an alliance has its own chemistry. And sometimes, again, it has to do with ego. Would it
that's a good
matter
point.
at the end of the day? And I do not forget as well that the political process can largely be very fluid. Politicians hardly have permanent enemies. At some point, very surprisingly, you just see them, dissolving into the bigger parties, and you see the bigger parties accommodating them too. And of course, we eventually hear that the leaders of the bigger parties have large hearts. They have open minds. That's why they are accommodating these ones. So we cannot foreclose that from happening. Whether they do it formally, it can happen. It doesn't matter whether they do it formally. It can also happen informally. And in post-election period, we could see alignment, realignment, horse trading, shifting of grounds, and all such things happening. And you could find some of these people in places that we anticipate that they should be, even though they probably wouldn't be winning the election, like we somewhat envisage, not just because we're emotional or sentimental about it, but from what the polls are saying. And again, irrespective of whether they disagree or agree with the polls.
Yeah, but of course we don't know the other side, which is, the other side of the story, which is whatever negotiations are going on behind the scenes. We just know that those things are not in the public domain at the moment. But this is the first time I'm seeing you in 2023, so I can't really. I really would like to
see you physically, right?
Seeing you physically, but I'd love to tap your brain about where you think you see things standing now. We've got about a minute or so in 2023.
I think things are going on
with a month or so to go.
Things are going on very well. INEC is preparing. I see the institution will have technology playing a very major role in the election. Simon tried to highlight some of the challenges we're having. One other challenge is that of technology. Will BVAS work the way we expect it to work? Will there be challenge of power, electricity? What about logistics? Will there be hitches? Those are the fears that we have. And of course, what about the vexed question of insecurity, which INEC also has pointed attention to? But the fact that INEC is actually mentioning it now means that we have opportunity of preparing, to forestall these dangers from happening, which also gives me the impression that the election will actually hold. And of course, we'll have a president-elect post-February 25 by the grace of God.
Prof, thank you very much indeed. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi is the public affairs commentator, Arise News analyst and head of mass communications at Bayes University in Abuja. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.